this seminar. Maybe some of you attended that. I do have some things that I added to, some new information, a few things that we had taken out of the class to be able to shorten it up. I wanted to be able to do this in 3 hours. That way your Saturday isn't completely gone for you. But it's really, really good information. We will cover a lot. So one of the goals is just to get all of these resources in your hands, get this information to you. So it provide an opportunity for you. I mean, afterward, you're able to take these home. If you want to take extra booklets, you're welcome to do that. But things that you're able to go over and sift through and look through your notes. Because while this may not answer every question right now, there's things in here that'll be so helpful as you're facing different life stages and different life stages of grief. And so about 75% of what we cover is I'm going to talk about death-related loss, okay? But the thing about loss is it doesn't matter if it's death or life-related. A lot of these same principles apply across the board. So as we're going through this, I will talk about life-related loss and death-related loss, even if on the screen it says it's talking about death-related loss. So we'll go over all of that. But that's really the main goal, to get the information to you so you can, hopefully this helps you in the things that you're facing, but also to be able to multiply this information, to be able to help others, to be able to help your kids and grandkids as they might be going through things, and friends or family members. You know, sometimes these kind of events are even hard to get to because it's like, I don't know if I can even think about what I'm going through. And we're going to talk about that too, if that's something you struggle with, to say, man, I barely even got here because I don't even want to think about the loss and the things I've experienced in life. And so that's actually a normal and okay thing. And so we'll talk about that. This is our second Grieve Well seminar. Grieve Well is something that I put together for social media and for things just to get out there for people, just learning how to be able to grieve in a good way, knowing that grief can be something, if it's something we've got to have in our life, if it's something that's going to happen, we might as well do it well. And so let's go ahead and start going through this. In your booklets, this should follow along page by page. If it doesn't, it's not my fault. And so I'll tell you who to blame later. Just blame Tommy. I'm sure he had something to do with it. Okay. So we'll go through page by page, talking about what grief really is, okay? So grief is a process. Grief is not a one-time experience. It's not just something you experience just one time in your life. Grief is a process of experiencing these things. So psychological, so mental and an emotional state. It's the process experiencing things mentally that you have to process and work through, and things that you don't understand. And so it's psychological, it's an emotional state. So there's times when you're grieving that right away you'll be in maybe even shell shock, and you're not experiencing emotions till later on. And maybe some of you have experienced that before, to where you've gone through something maybe even tragic, a loss, and the emotions aren't there at first, but they come later. That's all part of grieving. It's behavioral. It's how we act because of the loss that we faced. And so a lot of times our life coming into the loss will affect our life after the loss and our behavior and how we act. So grief is all of these things: psychological, behavioral. Sometimes people will limit grief to just a sadness, but it's so much more than just I feel sad or I don't understand. It affects our behavior. It affects us socially and how we interact with others, how we're fearful about social interactions, or trusting people with the information that we hold so dear and so close. And if I'm going to share this information with you about my loss, I want to make sure it's a safe place. That's in death-related loss or even life, like maybe you've lost a job or a relationship or been through a divorce, any of that. You know, sometimes it can be hard to get to that point to trust somebody in social situations and what you're going through at the moment. So grief is this process: psychological, behavioral, social. Grief can be physical, and sometimes those are symptoms that we ignore and push away. But we'll talk about here in a moment what some physical symptoms are of grief. Basically, it's the reactions to the experience of loss, and that can look so many different ways. That's why That's why grief can seem to be so complicated and so chaotic. But the best thing to do with chaos is to provide clarity to it. And so hopefully today helps bring a little more clarity to chaos. All right? And so let's go to the next one. What grief is not? Contrary to popular belief, grief cannot be fixed. It's not something that just that goes away, and it's not something that you just like put back together, right? So this room that you're sitting in right now, this was 2 different classrooms, right? And so there was a wall right down the center here, and we had to come in and deconstruct this room, tear things apart, and we were able to put it back together really pretty well so it doesn't look like 2 rooms anymore. We were able to reconstruct it and put it back together. You really can't tell as you look down the ceiling line, the tiles all look the same. It looks like one flowing. You probably can't tell that, what are we, 1.5 inches off from one side to the other? I don't know. Yeah, you probably can't tell some of those small little details. Maybe 3/4 of an inch. I'll give you that. All right. And so, but the small little details you maybe can't tell because things have been reconstructed and started to put back right. Grief is one of those things. While there can be repair in it, it'll never be completely. It's not something to be fixed, but it's something that we go through, something that we process, and then something that we can do well. And so that's why we get irritated when somebody tries to fix us in our grief or fix us in our loss or tries to just say, well, just get over it, okay? So grief is something that cannot be fixed. Grief cannot just be taken away. There's no like poof to when, today's the day when I lost my grief, right? And so that's just not going to happen. Grief is something that can't be ignored. There's avoidant personalities where we kick the can just down the road. Let's keep kicking the can. If I can just keep in the can down the road, maybe I can avoid grieving my entire life, right? That's when you become a really bitter old person and nobody wants to be around you, okay? And so if we just keep kicking the can down for the rest of our life, it's something that really can't be ignored, and it still affects you even if you want to avoid it. Grief is not linear. There's no timeline for grief to say, this is when grief began and this is when grief ended for me in life. A lot of times you're not able to even point to a place where even grief began. So some of you here today, you might be experiencing the heavier emotions of grief. There might be something specific that you're grieving right now, but I can guarantee you this is not the first time that you've experienced grief. And maybe even some of the emotions that you're experiencing now for whatever you may be grieving, you may be thinking today that these emotions are too much. These emotions are bigger than what I'm actually facing. Well, actually, a lot of times, especially if you're avoidant, a lot of times you don't know when grief begins. It's this accumulation of grief or this compounding of grief. And so we have moments where we're more emotional, even more so than what we're actually grieving because of all the other grief or loss that we've experienced in our life can sometimes compound into one moment. And that's why sometimes people may look at you and be like, man, why are they so upset about this? That shouldn't be this difficult. It shouldn't be this hard. And it's actually, those are called disenfranchised losses. And there'll be a whole section on that today. So grief is something that cannot be ignored. Grief is not limited, never limited to emotional experiences. That is just one way that you experience grief. Just one way. So grief is not linear with an end, and there is never a clear ending point to when you stop grieving. This is something, this is why I wanted to make it such a big point for us to say we have to learn how to grieve well, because grieving's not something that just ends and you will continue to have loss in your life. And so a lot of us even have a PTSD when it comes to loss, meaning that you've probably experienced other tragic losses in your life, and you might have smaller losses that you're experiencing now, and those seem like the big ones, okay? And so there's never a clear ending point to grieving. Let's go ahead and go to the next page. So we're buzzing through some of this pretty quick because I want to get to some of the areas of therapy today. I want to give you guys a moment too to ask questions, and we'll probably about 15 minutes I'll open up for some questions. So what is normal grief? Let's talk about the emotions that are normal when we're grieving. We've experienced sadness, anger. These are secondary emotions to things that have already happened. So anger is one of the most common secondary emotions to fear. So I'm fearful of what might happen next or what might happen to me. So anger is secondary emotion. So when you find yourself angry or in a rage or upset, the best question to ask yourself is, what am I afraid of? Or what am I fearing right now? That'll help you work through some of that emotion. I'm not saying you'll never be angry again, or there'll never be a hole in the wall again. You'll never throw anything again. But it's important to know when I'm angry, there's a why about this anger, and that why has to do with something that I am afraid of, and it's good to work through that. I'd like to say, as we're working through emotional things, our brain is made up into mostly two parts, right? There's several other things going on, but I want to divide it into two parts today. We have our area of emotions, and we have our area of the feelings that we're going through here. Most of the time, those things are going to be located back in this portion of our brain. Then we have our cognitive thinking, our ability to be able to problem solve or think logically about something. That's at the front portion of our brain. When emotions are prevalent, we are not cognitive. That's why people say don't make emotional decisions. When our emotions are present, we are not cognitive, and so we have to work hard to become more cognitive or logical about something to be able to work through it. This is why logic doesn't fix emotions. And so let's say you're really, really angry, or you're feeling really sad or anxious about whatever it is that you're facing or this loss, and then someone tries to come fix it for you with logic. Does that ever work, right? They can't fix it for you with logic. They can't fix it for you. They're able to think cognitively because they're separated from the emotion of it, but they'll never fix it with logic. And this is something good for you to even help others or to be able to help yourself. When you're in an emotional state, it's not always a bad thing. It's okay. Be in an emotional state for a moment, but learn how to meet yourself and others in that emotional state. So identify the emotion. Man, I'm really feeling sad right now. Why am I feeling sad? And start to kind of work through that emotion. That's okay. Meet yourself in the emotional state, but know that emotions eventually need to become cognitive. There has to be some eventual logic to say, this is why I'm sad and this is what I can do about it. That's the logic of anger is secondary to fear. What am I fearing? All of those are cognitive thoughts. One of the things that they teach us to do with children in situations, whether they're facing loss or just in emotional situations, especially younger children. You have to, let's say, this isn't 100% every time, okay? I've been a parent, and I'm still a parent. But let's say your 3-year-old or 4-year-old's in a tantrum state or just in an emotional state and you can't get them out of it. They say one of the best things to do to be able to help them get out of it is have them do frontal cortex things. Meaning, okay, where are your eyes, where's your mouth, where's your ears? Touch my nose. Things that are frontal cortex things that help draw them out of that emotional state. It's not 100% of the time. They're kids, right? And we're trying, sometimes our emotions take over. But most of the time that helps someone get from an emotional state that they can't get out of and back into a cognitive, more logical state, and then you're able to communicate with them. You can't communicate logic with a child that's in a tantrum, right? Have you ever experienced that? There's just no way. And so other things they do, like for our youngest daughter, sometimes we just give her we have a corn bag that we keep in the freezer, and it's nice and cold. You give them something like that focuses them, gives them an opportunity to focus on something else and brings things to a cognitive place of mind. And so you can do that for yourself. If you're wanting to help others, okay, if you're wanting to help others and they're facing really heavy emotions because of loss or grief, one of the best ways that you can help them is to be able to meet them in their emotion. You can meet them in emotion. Man, I see that you are sad. I see that you're angry. Man, I would be angry too. Whatever it takes to meet them in the place of anger or sadness. Sometimes you cry with them. Sometimes you get upset with them too and be like, this is so unfair. This is ridiculous, right? Sometimes you can get upset with them to a point. And so meeting them in that motion helps draw people out and helps draw yourself out of an emotional place to a cognitive way of thinking. Then you can have a more logical conversation. So, but these are all normal emotions: sadness, anger, to feel guilty like you had done something to cause this loss. This isn't just death related. If it's a loss in a relationship or a loss of a job or or you had to move or something had to change in your life, guilt is still something that's just there to say, I did something to cause this loss. I did something to cause this loss for my family or my kids or my loved ones. Okay, guilt is a normal emotion. Anxiety, fear of the future, what's going to happen next, right? This is a big part of grief and loss. And so maybe some of you are experiencing anxiety and you don't know why and you've never related it to loss, right? This is a real emotional loss and anxiety. And anxiety is always fear of a future that you can't control. That's what anxiety is. I look to the future, I can't control it, and I'm afraid of it, so I'm anxious about whatever it is. Anxiety, loneliness, obviously, a loss, something in your routine has changed, a loneliness, fatigue, emotional fatigue. I can't cry anymore. I can't be angry anymore. An emotional fatigue is a real thing. So don't think you're broken because you're in a fatigue state. Don't think you're completely broken and completely apathetic just because you might even said it to somebody, I'm just tired of crying over this. Okay, that is emotional fatigue. That's a normal thing. A sense of helplessness, shock. I was talking to my counselor therapist this week, and we were going through a situation that I'd faced 10 years ago. And so we were working through this entire situation, just detail by detail. And she brought out something that I'd never seen in it before, and it really was really helpful. She said, you were shell-shocked. When this happened, when you experienced this particular loss and this particular disappointment, you were absolutely shell-shocked. That's why you made such and such decision. Oh, that makes sense. Shock. It's a normal part of loss. And it's okay to be able to see it as something normal that you're going to work through. None of these things last. They're not meant to last forever, right? They're not meant to last forever. And a lot of these things don't. You will move from place to place to place, all right? So, shock. Sometimes a normal emotion is relief. And that's something that we have a hard time with because we don't want to feel guilty. We don't want to feel guilty, which is the other emotion, and we don't want to feel like we have betrayed the person that we've lost or the situation that we've lost in, to be able to feel relief. And sometimes that does come out of a bad job situation, or sometimes out of a long period of time of caretaking for someone. Sometimes there is that moment of, this is over, and that's okay. It's not a mean thing. It's not it doesn't mean that you are a terrible person. We've experienced this in foster care 100%. 100% experienced this in foster care, to where we've had children come through our home and we loved them while they were there, but we were completely okay when they left, right? We were completely okay when they left. And that's a normal part of the loss. It doesn't mean we hated them, doesn't mean we were mean or mistreated them while they were there, but there was a moment to say, I'm going to move on to the next step or the next phase, and there is relief. And that's something you cannot beat yourself up just because you feel relieved that something's over. It does not mean that you've betrayed someone or betrayed something, okay? And then there's a numbness to life, an apathy to life, just like I'm here, I'm existing, and the world seems to be going on around me on autopilot mode. That is a normal emotion when it comes to grief. All right.